Guys, welcome back to Rodder's Garage. In the last video, I picked up this 48 Chevy truck extended cab airbag deal and took it for a test drive because it was not really handling too well. Put it up on the hoist, inspected it, and it was not good basically. So we went ahead and decided to order a brand new suspension kit for the front of this thing, and that is the plan in today's video, to get this suspension installed in the front of this 48 Chevy pickup and get the air ride set up properly so it doesn't need 150 pounds in the front bags to hold it at ride height. So as you saw already, I just pulled out the engine to make some room up there to work on the new cradle and cut the old one out. I also went ahead and pulled off the steering rack, front shocks and calipers, brake calipers, got all that stuff out of the way. I'm gonna go ahead and finish off pulling these suspension parts, get the plasma cutter over here, get all this stuff butchered out of here, and try to clean these frame rails up and get the boxing plates on today. Then we can move on to installing the front suspension. Alright guys, so I finished up last night cutting everything off this chassis that I wanted out of the way, and it is time to do some serious grinding. Before I take this stuff off, one more look at it. These are the original pieces of that Mustang II style suspension, and as you can tell, they kind of booger welded them all the way around the perimeters and stuff. Maybe I can get lucky and just cut with the cutting wheel right on the inside of the welds, and maybe the plates will fall off. I'm hoping they didn't plug weld the crap out of it. This one doesn't look like it. This one potentially, as you can see here and here, might have it. So I'll just cut between them with the cutoff wheel, score everything, take the air hammer, blow as much of that junk off the rail as I can before actual grinding. And then, well, go ahead and grind for a couple hours here, get everything smoothed off there, take these horrendous welds off on the bottom of the chassis, go ahead and come in, grind off the motor mounts where I cut those off, what's remaining of that, and then I'm probably also going to go ahead and just smooth off the welds on these boxing plates they have. I think I'm going to leave them in there. They've already got them welded in. It's channel iron. I do have those new boxing plates, but you know what? If I can grind this and it looks presentable, then I'll probably just take the boxing plate and add it to the front of this motor mount section and just bring it up to the cross member and just do that. Save myself a bunch of time and work cutting this out really for no reason. So clean all that up too. Same thing on the other side. I'm gonna get masked up and get grinding. Wow. You guys gotta check this out. Watch this. And it's looking pretty good right now. You're gonna notice here at the back of their boxing plates, I didn't do the back 6 inches of each side just because the transmission and exhaust is in the way. I'm just gonna leave it. I could pull all that stuff out and do that, but for that last 6 inches, I'm just gonna leave it alone. Everything from there forward is really nice. Everything's filled in. A couple of things that I will say is I don't know what kind of wire they used when they welded this stuff up, if it was some really hard flux core or what the deal was, but back when I was air chiseling on this side, you might have noticed that those welds were just air chiseling right off the side of the rail, and there was pretty much zero penetration on most of that stuff. I actually air chiseled a majority of the weld off this passenger side where they had the original Mustang cradle welded in. And the other thing is, any amount of grinding that I did on the welds, specifically grinding off these booger welds on the boxing plate from here to about here where the old motor mounts were, I went through like 5 or 6 flap discs to take care of that. That stuff was super, super hard. And on top of it, when I went ahead and welded over it to fill in all the pinholes and fill in some gaps they had, my welder did not like welding over that. It actually just screwed my weld up from the inside out. It wasn't dirty, it was something with the metal from the welds that they had going on here. So regardless, all that stuff's taken care of. And as you can see, I got a level sitting up here and a few marks on the rails. And this is probably the point where you're gonna wanna pay attention if you are actually installing one of these Speedway kits into your Chevy pickup. Let me show you a few things. So if you're doing one of these 47 to 54 pickup truck cradle installs from Speedway, a couple of things to take note of. This holds true with pretty much all cradle installs. The center line of your axle is the center line of that cradle. You center the cradle out on the center line of the front axle. That's standard with all Mustang II cradle kits like this. So I went ahead and marked out my center line. I kind of measured that before I cut the old stuff out. And also I have another one of these trucks in the front room that I double verified those measurements, and for the most part I kind of knew where they went. Usually I've done a lot of these trucks, put a different style cradle in them, and I always measure off the rivets up here. It's easy, and the rivets are always pretty much in the same spot. I've never had these rivets not be in the same location side to side on the rails. So if you are doing one of these trucks, basically I measured off the back side of these rivets to find my center line. Same over here, that light just blinded us. And the actual center line from the back of that rear rivet holding the front cradle in, 7 9/16 of an inch on the head. So basically if you put your tape measure up against the back of this rivet, pull back and mark it at 7 9/16 on both sides off that rivet, that's gonna be the center line of your cradle. Kind of a little cheat sheet there for you. Also, to verify that, I went ahead and ran my level from the center line on both rails out over here on the passenger side. All right, so I've got that level on my center lines across both rails. I'm gonna hold this tape measure pretty much level with the running board or the box of the truck. I don't want to be angled. I'm going to hold it, just eyeball it level with the truck. I'm going to put it up to the fender well opening and rise it up until I am basically at 28 inches over here on the front side. So I'm level with the running boards. I am measuring 28 inches in the fender well opening. 14 inches is the center, obviously that's half of 28, and 14 comes out right on the back edge of that level, just to verify that my wheel or my cradle is centered in the front fender openings. So by checking that out, I know that my center line of my suspension is going to be right and centered in this fender opening on the outside. Once again, if you're doing a 47 to 54, well, my measurement, and usually it's always the same, off the back of that rivet is 7 9/16 of an inch to the center line of your new cradle for your 47 to 54 pickup. So I got the cradle up into place and pretty much eyeballed center. Just gonna verify with a tape measure. I'm going off the outside of the frame rails, which you always should really do because the outside of the rails never really moved. The boxing plates could actually be off a little bit. You could be off a 1/16, you could be off a 1/4 inch, depending on how you laid your boxing plates out. So I'm gonna measure from the outside of the rail to the lower control arm hole here, basically in line with the cradle. I am 25 1/4 there, right on. So by doing that, I know that my lower control arm holes are 100% the same distance inboard of the outside of the rails, and everything should be good to go at this point to tack this thing into place. Also gonna do a quick measurement down on the back side here. I'm 9/16 inboard from the outside of the rail. 9/16 there, that is 100% centered in the rails. And I'm gonna do a quick angle check. And with the angle finder on the back of the cradle, I am at about 4.5 degrees. So yeah, with the way they have this cut, 4.5 degrees minus the 2 that the truck is leaning back, it's about 3 degrees angled back on this cradle. So I'm just gonna call it good with Speedway's pre-cut sections on this lower cradle. So verify one more time I didn't move this, and I'm gonna throw some tacks at it. Looks good. All right, got a few tacks on the front side. Gonna verify this one more time. 100% centered. And if we go to the bottom of the truck, just to verify that I am the same distance on both sides, even though it should be because I measured off those rivets. Let's go, I'll go right up to the rail to the front. 19 1/8. 19 1/8 from the front up here, tight to the rail, to the front of this frame rail. 19 1/8, identical. So right now I'm 100% side to side centered. 19 1/8 from the front of the rails. It should be 100% square in the chassis. And I know that when I measured that 7 9/16 off that rivet and laid out my marks, they should have been right, which I guess it was because everything came out. So Throw a few more tack welds at this thing so it doesn't fall out. I can get my transmission jack out of the way. And gotta put those top hats on.
All right, so I got 2 bars in here on those upper spring buckets, and the reason for that is to keep everything on the same plane. Got to keep everything level and true. Over here on the driver's side, you're going to notice that there's no gap under there. This is actually laying nice and flat on the top of this spring bucket. If we go over to the passenger side, well, you're going to notice, now let's go on the outside. You're going to notice that there's a gap on the inside. That means this hat or this bucket is angled up a couple degrees. I'm gonna bust this thing loose and get it so everything is exactly on the same plane across the frame. First, I'll clamp the other side, crack this tack loose, get it set down. I'll probably just go ahead and clamp it to these, use that to hold it level, and then re-tack this side to the frame. And that means both spring buckets are totally at the same angle and parallel, running through the center line of that cradle. Let's clamp it together and weld it up. Three and 5/16, 3 3/8. Awesome. Same thing over here. 3 5/16. Cut them down. Alright guys, well I finished welding up the mounts for the lower control arms to the cradle. The piece in between down here is welded in, as well as this with the gusset on the back side of the cradle. And I did my first mock-up of the control arms and spindle, and honestly everything's looking great. Everything's in line, it flows nice. I also stuck that airbag in the back side, and that should work out pretty good. This is actually a coil spring setup, and I will have to make some provisions to mount this bag to the spring cup in the lower control arm, but everything is looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that airbag out real quick and throw a chain from the bottom control arm up to the spring cup up here just to hold it roughly level. I'm gonna throw the rotor on with dry bearings real quick and just set the tire on it and verify that I'm centered out in the front fender. If that all checks out, I'll pull these control arms back off and finish burning everything off to the chassis. All right, so I'll throw this chain in here. Put it up through the upper shock hole and put the lower shock bolt through it. Something like that. Right on the money, centered in that wheel well, looking good. So pull that back off, pull the control arms back off, and burn this thing up. out of gas. Guess we're finishing up tomorrow, guys. Front suspension is all 100% welded into place and ready to go. So it's time now to start mounting the rack up on here so I can get the C-notches put in. So I got some hardware laying here on the floor, whole bunch of washers stacked on my two 5/8 bolts, and that's basically just so I don't have to run the bolts into my brand new $3.25 a piece Nylock fine thread 5/8 nuts. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw the rack up here, get it mounted on the mounts. I can get my center line for where the C-notches need to be for the inner tie rods, and then start marking those out, cut some pipe, get the C-notches put in. I also, up top, marked out the inner fenders, laid a few lines out there because they're a little bit choppy. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim off a little bit more radius to the front corner like this, and I marked out the other side identical to the driver's side, so they will both be the exact same opening once I cut those and trim them back out. Kind of be nice to have both of those control arm notches, let's call them, to be the same mirrored image side to side. So I'll cut those real quick first. Let's get this rack mounted up, put some C-notches in, and then we can start assembling some things. Well, I ran into a little problem with my new steering rack. So this is actually a T-Bird rack that I ordered from O'Reilly's, 91 T-Bird, I believe. And usually this is what I get for replacements for Mustang II racks and stuff in hot rod builds and stuff like that. Anything that uses one of these, basically, any of these style of cradle. Now, as you saw, I just ground off that knob up here on top by the input here on the rack, and that's fairly common. That actually is something I've done many times before, just to clear the side of the cradle, and usually that's all I need to do. However, on this one, I don't know what the difference is on this, if this cradle's a little bit skinnier, or if they made these a little wider, but I'm actually hitting with the boss for the lower power steering hose on the front corner, as you can see down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the rack back out after I mark that out, put a C-notch in the front end of that, and just lay a piece of pipe in, burn it all the way around, grind it off. That's going to provide me with more than enough clearance to make this rack work. Every other dimension of this rack is pretty much identical to a Mustang, so I'm guessing that if you would order the $250 rack from Speedway, it probably would have fit right in. Might be a little bit different placement on the lines, on the input and output for the power steering rack, but who really knows? I'm gonna make this one work, so take it back out, make a few cuts. Chassis is clearanced. The notches are all done here on the driver's side and the rack fits great now. As you saw, I also had to nip off the front corner of the cross member here, and that was for clearance for that lower power steering line. As it comes straight up, I needed a little more clearance on this front edge up here. Heavily welded everything on the inside, made sure there was a big gap to fill with weld so I had good penetration, and after I ground it off there was plenty of weld left in there. Also, as you saw, I welded it from the bottom side all the way around everything I notched out to add some additional strength. That was 1/8 inch wall tubing for the notch down here. This was actually the chunk that I cut off for this angle. I flipped it over backwards and shoved it back in and burned all the way around that on the inside and outside as well. So strength wise, I don't think I really took anything away from that. So it's looking good, everything fits. Time for some C-notches. Alright guys, well I finished up my C-notches last week, got everything ground down and buffed off, and that pretty much wrapped up all of the fabrication and welding that needed to be done on the chassis side of the front suspension install here. So basically I got one more thing to do yet before I can start spraying some paint on my bare metal parts up here, and that is install a new motor mount, because I cut those old ones off the side of the rail, the puck style mounts. What I have down here is a brand new Speedway tubular small block Chevy cross member for the engine. On the side of the test block here, I've got some brand new energy suspension poly mounts mounted up already, ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this thing up over the front fenders, get it coupled off to the transmission here, take a few measurements, get my angles set right, trim down this cross member, weld it off in between the rails up here, and that'll pretty much make everything ready for paint. Let's do it.
And that is one small block Chevy tubular cross member installed, and that pretty much wraps up all the welding and fab on the front end of the truck. It also wraps up this video. That's right, I'm gonna call this one quits here, guys. I'm gonna go ahead off camera between now and the next video and get the whole front frame painted. Also gonna paint the new upper and lower control arms, get all that stuff ready for assembly, and probably throw the engine in this thing as well, because I want to have the weight on the front end of this thing for playing with the new airbags. So I'm gonna get everything prepped out, everything ready for assembly, and in the next video we're gonna play with those airbags and see if we can't make this thing a reasonable air pressure at ride height so it actually rides nice, rather than the 140 pounds that it took before I changed all the front suspension. I also have a couple of things to do to that engine before I put it in there, such as replacing the intake gaskets, because as you can see here on the back side, the valley gasket is coming out the back and leaking oil profusely down both sides of the block. Also have a valve cover leak on this side, so I've got intake gaskets and valve cover gaskets, and now's the time to do it before it's back in the engine bay. So I'm gonna take care of that, get the engine back in, and like I said, paint everything up on the front side and have all that suspension stuff ready to install. And once I get the airbags and everything mounted up in the front in the next video, there's one more thing left to do, and that was chase all the welds on that rear forelink. Like we saw in the first video, it's actually set up properly. Airbags work great in the back, but the welds, they have a little bit to be desired. So I'm gonna wire wheel down all those welds and chase all those welds in the next video too, and then I think we're gonna have a nice driving 48 extended cab Chevy pickup after that. But we'll find out in the next one. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching. Till next time.